Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We've plenty coming up, including, of course, the latest from the Conservative Party leadership. Tom Tugendhat, never a minister, but here with me talking about a fresh start. And Robert Halfon, who's worried about who's actually running the ship of government while they all fight over who's going to be the next in charge. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. International Trade Minister Penny Mordant has become the latest MP to announce her Conservative leadership bid. 9 MPs are now in the running, with Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps putting their name forwards yesterday. They were joined by former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid, who've both promised to cut corporation tax. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to announce her leadership intentions. MP for Tatton Esther McVeigh says she's backing Jeremy Hunt, who said she would be Deputy PM if he becomes Prime Minister.
I thought, no, let's reach out, let's reach across the Conservative Party, because you'll know Jeremy Hunt and I are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. But I do not believe that we can get the country back on board. And that's what's key here. It is reaching out to the country, delivering for the country. And this is what we've got to do so that we can appeal to the blue wall. And I don't believe anybody better than Jeremy Hunt can appeal to that blue wall. And he, of me, thought that I could be the person who reaches out to that red wall.
But the MP for Redditch, Rachel McLean, says Sajid Javid is the best man for the job.
He's been running the health service for the last year, dealing with the after effects of the global pandemic. So for me, he has got that combination. He's the total package for me. And I believe that he is also the person to unite our party, because let's face it, that's another challenge that we have. We have to appeal to all parts of the country and all parts of our United Kingdom. And I genuinely think he's the person to do that.
Almost 150 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel this weekend so far. Children were among those who were rescued from 3 small boats. It brings the total number of crossings this year to over 13,000, almost double last year's figure. Downing Street has confirmed the deportation agreement with Rwanda will continue despite Boris Johnson's resignation. Protesters in Sri Lanka say they'll continue to occupy both the Prime Minister's home and the presidential palace until they both officially quit. President Rajapaksa is expected to resign on Wednesday, and the Prime Minister has agreed to step down but hasn't specified when. It follows dramatic scenes yesterday, which saw the PM's home set alight and protesters stormed the presidential palace. Thousands of anti-government demonstrations clashed with police in the capital as the country endures its worst economic crisis in 7 decades. At least 10 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit a 5-story apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. At least 34 people are feared to be trapped under the rubble after the building collapsed. Rescuers are still trying to find survivors. The Royal Air Force has deployed fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. The RAF says it's part of an increased presence in the region and was requested by the host nations, who recently applied to join NATO. The UK signed mutual security assurance declarations with both countries in May. And all eyes will be on centre court today for the men's singles final at Wimbledon. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will be in the royal box to watch Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic battle it out for the title. Kate, who's the patron of the All England Lawn Tennis Club, is expected to present the trophies to both the runner-up and the winner during a ceremony after the match. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Alice, thanks very much indeed. Well, it's getting tasty, isn't it? With more runners and riders, a few choice lines emerging from the candidates as well. Grant Shapps told the Sunday Times he was ruling out a general election if he was successful in becoming a Prime Minister, but he also put the boot in to one or two of his fellow candidates, saying he had, and I quote, not spent the last few turbulent years plotting or briefing against the Prime Minister or organising a leadership campaign in the background. Meanwhile, the current Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, has said that he will lower taxes, boost defence spending and continue with the reforms that he began whilst Education Secretary. Well, the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, joins me later on to reflect on the hiatus in education that frankly has been compounded by this leadership election and yet another reshuffle with new junior ministers getting up to all sorts of curious things in a period of general concern in schools as we approach a new term at about the time that a new Prime Minister and presumably yet another Education Secretary will be unveiled. On the race itself, it is beginning to look a bit like former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who says tax cuts are fairy tales, versus the rest of the field, all of whom want tax cuts soon to ease the cost of living crisis. No one suggested trying to undo Brexit, even those who previously had their doubts. Get it done for real is the common mantra. This is a promise also made by Tom Tugendhat, who joins me later on in this programme. Now, remind yourselves, Tom's never been a minister, but he has been the high-profile chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. But will the lack of a souvenir ministerial red box help him or hinder him, as a lack of experience in office is seen by many as a drawback? As I said at the top, his mantra is a fresh start, so we'll be talking about that. We had so much of that on yesterday that I ran out of time for many of your emails and tweets as I wanted to read out. So I'm going to start with some of the best from yesterday. Karen joined the conversation saying, and all candidates should listen to this one closely, as a Tory member, I think we've been royally screwed over by the party. When Boris goes, my membership goes, my vote goes, and I am not alone. Many others keep them coming in today on candidates, issues, tax, education, all the rest of it. Indeed, anything that's on your mind, be you a Tory or not. Because do remember, the Tories aren't only choosing a new leader for them, they are choosing a new Prime Minister for all of us. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me personally or at GBNews, or, of course, you can go onto Facebook. Right, let's get underway now, and I'm delighted to say, joining me with the very latest twists and turns, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who out the corner of my eye I could see was even checking the phone. He's doing it right now. It is such a rapidly moving story.
It's minute by minute, isn't it, to a large degree?
And is Penny Mordant the breaker this morning?
So, yes, we're up to 9 candidates, aren't we, in total now? That will definitely become 10 by tomorrow, because we know Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is going to make a speech in which she is almost certainly going to chuck her hat into the ring, if you like. Could be a couple of more others, but I think we're kind of now getting to where we're at in terms of the first rounds of voting, which is likely to start, we think, probably on Wednesday. Penny Mordant, very slick video, actually quite American in some ways. You and I have watched it. At the end, it was almost like, and I endorse this message, if you like. But interesting, actually, in some ways, not reflecting very much on herself, but actually the state of the country. And we've seen all the candidates out and about in the last 24, 48 hours, making their pitch, as you say, fundamentally to MPs to begin with. The real dividing line at the moment is, as you say, on tax. Rishi Sunak, given the impression he wants...
Let me interrupt. One thing on Penny before we come to tax, which we talked about yesterday and we could talk about again today. But before she released that video announcing and confirming her standing, she took to Twitter to seek to clarify her position on gender, on trans rights and women. And it went on, and it has got a lot of coverage. Some convinced, some not convinced.
Yeah, indeed. And you know, we know that this has been kind of one of her kind of key issues, and it was a real battleground, I think, at one stage between her and Angela Rayner in the House of Commons on that. And there is a sense where, you know, for certain people during this campaign, and we heard it, didn't we, I think from Kemi Baddock and others.
Yeah. Baddock, and Nadhim Zahawi's talked about it.
Yeah, indeed, an issue. But frankly, I think we're at, really interestingly, and the reason I kind of brought up, Alistair, that issue of tax is because in many ways, it does, at this moment, feel like everyone else and Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
But I say that as in Rishi Sunak is clearly out in the lead in terms of MPs. But there is also clearly a campaign to try and stop Rishi Sunak, not least of all from some close to the Prime Minister. Really interestingly, and we've already started to see the dirty tricks campaigns and the mudslinging, and frankly pointing out really important issues that you should do in an election campaign. But Zach Goldsmith has just said that, Mark Spencer, the former chief whip, that Rishi Sunak is, determined to make him the next DEFRA secretary, but goes on then to lay into Mark Spencer about how it would be bad news for nature. He calls Mark Spencer our very own little Bolsonaro after the Brazilian president. Great news for our political opponents. I mean, publicly on Twitter, this is already starting to get a little bit nasty. So we're going to have to see
one final thing before you move on to your final point, and that is an intriguing tweet that we got quite early on, which came, let me see if I can find it. It's Paul Johnson.
Oh, yes.
The universally respected boss of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who says, all well and good to talk about tax cuts, but we need to hear how you will also continue to seek to balance the books.
Well, this is the big point. This is the point that Rishi's camp would make, is that we're paying over £80 billion a year, not on the debt, on interest on the debt. Interest rates are also, by the way, going to go up. That number's going to go up. Liam Fox, for example, one of Rishi Sunak's supporters, has been very clear, actually being prudent, balancing the books is a Conservative thing to do. Simply cutting taxes, maintaining high public spending and getting us into even more debt is not a Conservative thing to do. But it is also clear that in that big, massive dividing line, that they know, frankly, that tax cuts are popular with the public, popular with the Conservative membership. And there is an argument, a very legitimate argument, to say, actually, the best way to bring down our debt is to grow the economy, and the best way to grow the economy is through tax cuts. This is going to be, as I say, the totemic issue of this leadership contest. But also, we're going to have, as I say, dirty trick campaigns, and it'll be interesting to see what Number 10's role in all of this is.
Need to wear a tin hat if you're a candidate reading the Sunday papers.
And there are a lot of people out there, and I'm sure there's a lot of our viewers as well, who do feel that Rishi and others, not just him, were pretty treacherous, have stabbed Boris Johnson in the back and should be punished for it. And that narrative is going to play out as well.
Absolutely. Darren, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for that. Back to the phone and back to the wires, and come back and see us before we go off air, if you'd be so kind. More emails, because you've been so busy yesterday and today. Let me just read out precisely, rather than quoting it from memory, that one from Paul Johnson at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Everyone would like lower taxes, but need to be clear about consequences, short-run and long-run issues. In the short run, the Office of Budget Responsibility did say that £30 million headroom against fiscal targets, but assumes spending rises only at a rate set out in September, when inflation is expected to hit 4%. Barry joined in on the debate about the leadership, and Penny, who Darren and I were just talking about. I'd love to wish Penny all the very best, but the British media will swallow her up and spit her out. That is shameful. And finally, Carl says, after reading Suella Braverman's views, I agree with every word that she says, and so far she is the best choice. Rishi Sunak would be the worst choice, with the exception of Jeremy Hunt, who I don't think is even fit to be an MP. Well, that is your view, Carl. People in South West Surrey perhaps disagree with you. So thanks for that. Do keep it coming in. GB Views at GB News, Twitter, Facebook, all the rest of it. Now, joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, to carry on this conversation on the leadership race and the big issues, is Joanne Nadler, who is political commentator and author of the beautifully titled book, Too Nice to Be a Tory. They're not being terribly nice to Penny Mordant, who sought to clarify this issue of gender, women. She says, I know what a woman is, and there's piling in saying, no, you don't, you shouldn't have said what you said. Surprises me to be a frontline Tory issue.
Well, I'm surprised that you're surprised, really, because...
That's what makes these conversations so glorious.
Yeah, I think that it's fast becoming a frontline issue, not least because it's a clear blue line, effectively, between what the Tory party could articulate and what Labour seem to believe in. And I think that whether or not Penny Mordant became outspoken around gender ideology because she was trying to do the right thing, she was trying to be maybe compassionate, inclusive. I think what people perhaps feel concerned about is that in doing that, she has opened the door to an ideology which, frankly, is very anti-democratic, which is very radical, and which actually at its heart seeks to unpick democracy, the family. It's a huge, big issue, this.
Sure. And it's also one that, as it were, in a slightly different key of music, you're very active in. And that's why I'm going to bring Nadeem into the conversation as well, because former Education Secretary, now Chancellor, is saying in his manifesto that he will stop that nonsense going on in schools and stuff being taught to children that mums and dads don't want taught, and wants to be absolutely crystal clear on that. And I think that really heats it up, because schools are the vital battleground.
I mean, everybody has an interface with schools at some point, whether or not you have your own children, you've been to school, you've got relatives who may be teachers. I mean, schools is a sort of the public service that everybody encounters at some stage. And I think, increasingly we've seen, thankfully, in the press over the last few weeks in the media, exposés of things that parents have kind of sensed have been going on for some time, really radical ideas entering the classroom, not being discussed in an impartial way. And I think Nadeem Sahawi started to get involved with moving against this earlier in the year when he strengthened impartiality guidelines. But there's also a sense that, particularly in the sort of issues that Penny Mordant's been talking about on gender and on various other types of extreme ideology, that these have sort of come in via the back door, that nobody's really in charge of this, nobody's really scrutinising it. And so I think it is a really important issue for the candidates to confront.
And it's also a little bit like taxation. I'll bolt the two together, and we talked about it at great length yesterday. I see this leadership election as being very much a redefinition, a resetting of what being a Conservative in 2022 actually means, whether you are a low tax, lower spending, smaller state person, and whether you engage with any of that wokery or not. It's really about that.
Well, I mean, I think there are sort of core Conservative principles, which I'm sure all of the candidates would claim, run through their offer. I think what's going to be interesting in terms of the reset that you're referring to is how far the candidates can step away from the spectre of Brexit, which, still looms large in many senses. So, we've seen this morning this fascinating idea to sort of do a pincer movement across the red wall and the blue wall, with Jeremy Hunt bringing Esther McVeigh in as a potential deputy, which is almost a concession in a way that you can't be all things to all people. So, I mean, that reminded me very much of what we saw happening back in 1992. I mean, I can't believe how many of these leadership elections I've taken an interest in now. But that was when Ken Clarke brought John Redwood onto his team. Yeah. And what in the end happened was it allowed William Hague to come in through the middle. So that may not have been the best tactic by Jeremy Hunt, although it appears to be quite clever in the short term. But
on the tax issue as well, specifically, not just the political balance, and I 100% agree with what you were just saying there. I read out the tweet from Paul Johnson, who his Institute of Fiscal Studies is famous because it's impartial. He's not backing one candidate or the other. But he seems interpretively to be backing Rishi, who yesterday was saying, look, talk of tax cuts in the current climate is the stuff of fairy tales. All the other candidates are saying we need tax cuts, we need them now because of the cost of living crisis.
I think the tax cut issue is really interesting. I'm surprised in a way that it's been the first issue that all of these candidates have been talking about. And I think that's because they're trying to appeal, first and foremost, to their immediate electorate in the House of Commons. But I think they've got to be very careful that they don't look as if they're reflexively falling back on issues that have defined the Conservative Party in the past, which is literally just to use the expression tax cuts, and they felt that people would come running. They will need to explain how they're going to pay for this tax cut.
That's Paul Johnson's point, precisely.
And also, I think they need to present tax cuts in the context of how it's going to address the challenge to cost of living that so many people are suffering from or are facing at the moment. So, I mean, they have to put it in the wider context, I think, of how they're going to grow the economy, how these tax cuts can be paid for, and whether there's a distinction, which some of the candidates are drawing, between business taxes, corporation taxes, how you boost the economy, and personal taxes, and when they should start to come into play.
Yeah. That debate will run and run and run, I'm sure. What about the question of fresh starts, clean pairs of hands? You've got people like Penny Mordant, who we talked about earlier on, who was Secretary of State for Defence and famously sacked, is now back in as a junior middle-ranking minister, and Tom Tugendhat, who, as you know, I'm talking to at the end of the programme, who's never been minister at all. Is that going to play well or badly in the party, in the country?
I think it's a very tough ask for somebody that's never held even junior ministerial position to now run for the leader of the party and the Prime Minister. Because one of the things that brought Boris Johnson down was, despite the fact he had actually held high office, he just didn't seem to know how to exercise power. So I know Tom Tugendhat obviously has an eminent background in the military, and I'm sure he'll bring that to bear when he tries to explain why he should have that job. But I think it's going to be quite hard for him to make it through to the final two. In terms of a fresh start, I mean, absolutely. I think this is one of those reset moments, as we saw in the 1970s, pre-Thatcher. And I think absolutely they should be looking at a conviction politician who can come through and surprise people.
I've asked you to come back at 1 o'clock. After I've spoken to Robert Halfon and before I speak to Tom. I hope you'll be able to do that for the time being. Joanne Nadler, thank you very much indeed. Joining my conversation now, I'm delighted to say, is another old friend of mine, Trevor Kavanagh, Associate Editor of The Sun newspaper and one of the big figures of political journalism. Trevor, thank you for finding time for us this afternoon. How much damage, first of all, in your view, have the Tories inflicted on themselves in the way in which they got rid of Boris Johnson?
Good morning, Alistair. The short answer to that is massive. And it's almost impossible to comprehend how they've gone from an election-winning 80-seat majority to a position of near ashes of the Conservative government today. And, of course, the recriminations over Boris's defenestration and what is clearly a campaign of vengeance against one particular potential successor in particular, who is, of course, Rishi Sunak. I mean, it's not wonderful to behold for the voters who will make up their minds next time round.
Sure. On the point of Sunak as well, I began the conversation with Darren, who you know, and also just now with Joanne, who you know, about Paul Johnson coming in and in effect backing Rishi's warning that maybe people out in the country do want tax cuts. I'd love tax cuts, I'm sure we all would, but you've got to do the sums as well, and very few have done the sums yet.
No, I think that Paul Johnson's views on these subjects are beyond doubt, and I think that most of the candidates who are serious know that they cannot just hand out tax cuts like goodies without explaining exactly where the money's coming from. And at the moment, as Darren pointed out earlier, we face an enormous deficit, a burgeoning national debt. The interest on those debts are stupendous. We simply cannot just cut revenue from tax cuts willy-nilly without finding a way of financing them. I think that there are certain tax cuts that they could introduce, particularly at this time of need in the financial crisis, such as VAT, for instance, which we now are able to do now that we're out of the European Union. And another subject, bearing in mind what I've just said about the European Union, Brexit remains the dividing line within this Conservative government and the Conservative Party at large. I think that any candidate that goes to the people, or the members of the party at large, who is not an avowed Brexiteer, will get short shrift. And I think that's the big problem for Tom Tugendhat if he ever gets on that final ballot paper.
But the Sun newspaper this morning shows that it's only about 18% of Conservative Party members in the country who remain concerned about Brexit. Many of them appear to see it as having been dealt with, and now it's just down to the detail. Huge number still gravely concerned about immigration.
Yes, well, I think that that's all part of Brexit. It's the failure to deliver the fruits of Brexit, among which was control of our borders. And that abject failure, I think, is one of the reasons why Boris Johnson ended up in as much trouble as he has. I think had he started from the very beginning, and OK, we take into account the COVID crisis, but some ministers surely could have been set to task to prepare the ground and actually build upon the ground of Brexit and bring in the deregulation, the border controls, the the equivalent of a Bill of Rights for this country, so that we could see why we had voted Brexit and what the benefits were. The failure to do that, I think, is one of the reasons Boris is now no longer going to be Prime Minister.
One of the points that's made by a number of folk in the newspapers doing their pretty brutal obituaries of Boris Johnson is that he did drift away from what were seen as core Conservative beliefs over lower taxation, reduced spending, shrinking the state, partly because of the coronavirus and other matters as well. But do you see this as being another fundamental core value debate that you and I both witnessed with Margaret Thatcher and when she formed a government and then went on to rule for a decade?
Yes, and I think Margaret Thatcher's name and legacy still haunts the Tory party today. I think that an interesting candidate in all of this is Kemi Badenoch, who is a junior minister with Treasury experience. She's an engineer. At the moment, I think it's probably too early for her to be a serious candidate, but I think she's putting down a marker for the future. But what she actually has to say is very interesting, and I think will be very appealing in a generic sense for the Conservative Party, which is that it has to adopt and reinstate rigour in government. It has to do all the things that Boris simply didn't do or did the reverse of, the sort of the general shambles over spending, over green issues, over immigration, over the regulation of the city, all of these things which actually require sitting down and looking at the job in hand, thinking of the detail, working out the way through, and then implementing it. And implementing it by explaining to the public exactly what's going on and why they're doing it and why it's necessary.
Final question, Trevor, and it is this. Justin Madders, senior Labour figure, told me on the programme yesterday that Labour would embrace that debate and welcomes the fact that the Tories are trying to restate their value on tax, the size of the state and public spending. Do you give that credibility, or will they be genuinely running scared if the Tories are going to get back to low tax, smaller state, lower public spending?
I would give the Labour Party absolutely zero credibility on any of this, and particularly Keir Starmer himself, who has vacillated and jumped about on these issues in just about every direction possible since becoming leader. And it's not just Keir Starmer himself, who is a dud as far as I'm concerned, but it's the party itself which is completely divided and wide open, and it's reflected in the latest polls today, which show despite what's going on in the Conservative government, the Labour Party is still only 5% ahead in the polls. Their best performance was 13% recently. They should be 25 or 30% ahead. I think this next election is still wide open.
Trevor, great to talk to you, as always. Have a lovely afternoon, and thank you very much indeed. Joanne Nadler was listening to that, and when Trevor said about Kemi Badenoch...
I was nodding vigorously,
You were nodding vigorously.
Yes, I'm a big fan of
Come from
Kemi's.
nowhere, but really making a mark already.
She's incredibly impressive. She's a conviction politician. She's stood up against certain vested interests. She's articulate. She's got lots of ideas. I would really love to see her in the final round. I think she, as Trevor has said, I think she'd go down extremely well with party members. Yeah. I should also say, if she can't make it into the final round, then I think Suella Braverman has also been particularly impressive over the last week. She came out of the blocks with a clear articulation of what she wanted to
Steve Baker
achieve.
withdrew from the race to back.
Quite.
Joanne, back at 1. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more still to come on the programme today, including we'll be taking a trip to Sutton-on-Sea to chat about the future Conservative leader's prospects from a hyper-local perspective. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Afternoon, and the UK is looking dry with plenty of sunshine for many and feeling very warm with light winds. Let's take a look at the details. After a fine start across the southwest of England, it will remain dry with plenty of sunshine this afternoon, very warm with light winds and highs around 26 degrees Celsius. The fine and dry weather continues this afternoon across southeast England with lengthy periods of sunshine, feeling hot with highs of 29 degrees Celsius. A sunny day across much of Wales, though there will be some clouds around northern coasts. very warm with highs of 27 degrees Celsius. It'll be a fine afternoon with plenty of sunshine across northwest England, though there will be some cloud around the coast. Feeling warm with light winds and highs of 24 degrees Celsius. Across northeast England, the dry, fine and sunny weather is set to continue throughout this afternoon. Temperatures will rise higher than yesterday, so feeling very warm with highs of around 23 degrees Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland this afternoon, though, with some light rain for a time across Shetland and Orkney. There will be patchy cloud, but feeling warm with plenty of sunshine. Any lingering cloud across Northern Ireland will continue to break up throughout this afternoon, allowing for lengthy sunny periods. Remaining dry for all and feeling very warm with light winds. And fine weather is set to continue with plenty of sunshine this evening ahead of a warm night. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 12:32. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. International Trade Minister Penny Mordant has become the latest MP to announce her Conservative leadership bid. 9 MPs are now in the running, with Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps putting their names forward yesterday. They were joined by former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid, who've both promised to cut corporation tax. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to announce her leadership intentions. MP for Tatton Esther McVeigh says she's backing Jeremy Hunt, who said she would be Deputy PM if he becomes Prime Minister.
I thought, no, let's reach out, let's reach across the Conservative Party, because you'll know Jeremy Hunt and I are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. But I do not believe that we can get the country back on board. And that's what's key here. It is reaching out to the country, delivering for the country. And this is what we've got to do so that we can appeal to the blue wall. And I don't believe anybody better than Jeremy Hunt can appeal to that blue wall. And he, of me, thought that I could be the person who reaches out to that red wall.
Almost 150 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel this weekend so far. Children were among those who were rescued from 3 small boats. It brings the total number of crossings this year to over 13,000, almost double last year's figure. The Royal Air Force has deployed fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. The RAF says it's part of an increased presence in the region and was requested by the host nations, who recently applied to join NATO. The UK signed mutual security assurance declarations with both countries in May. And all eyes will be on centre court today for the men's singles final at Wimbledon. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will be in the royal box to watch Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic battle it out for the title. Kate, who's the patron of the All England Lawn Tennis Club, is expected to present the trophies. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair will be back in just a moment.
You just caught me having a sip of water there. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought we were going into a break. I do beg your pardon. That's why I was sitting there having a sip of water. Alice had finished. I thought we were going to the news. You are indeed watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Throughout this leadership campaign, we want to be testing the candidates, we want to be testing the big issues, but we also very much want to know what you think, and therefore we've been sending our reporters out and about across the country to see what the feeling is on the ground. The confusion remains strong because some of the candidates, of course, are not that well known, but mark my words, they will become extremely well known over the next few days. Our reporter Will Hollis has sent us this report.
Yes, well, it's a beautiful day here in Sutton-on-Sea on the Lincolnshire coastline. If you just look out there, bright blue skies, sandy beaches, 28 degrees today. It's certainly starting to heat up, but this isn't the only place it's heating up because the Tory party election for who might be the next leader is certainly warming up. We've seen a few different names being thrown into the ring in the last 24 hours. Grant Shapps, Sajid Javid, Nadeem Zahawi, as well as so many others. And who might be the next leader is going to be a conversation that a lot of members of the Tory party, as well as local councillors in places like this, are going to be talking about. And I've got a couple of them here. We've got Councillor Adrian Benjamin, who's on East Lindsey District Council, and we've also got Janet Stubbs, who's a local businesswoman. I know that you've had a little bit of money invested recently in Sutton-on-Sea, as well as the rest of the coastline, as part of levelling up the Towns Fund. Boris Johnson's mantra, really. What do you think might happen in the future without Boris Johnson in charge?
Heaven knows. It'll be perhaps less exciting, which will be sad to my mind, but we trust that what Boris has done will be built upon, because he's done a great deal. And we have levelling up. You say a little bit of money. We had this 50 million between Skegness and Mablethorpe and Sutton-on-Sea, and we have put in the business plans, and now we are starting work on it. And we hope in this next year we will see a transformation along our coastline. But it needs to have continued investment, and it needs somebody at the helm who's going to give an excitement and get the whole country behind us. That's the important thing, not just the Conservative Party. It's got to touch all people.
And how important is that levelling up agenda, investing in this sort of an area on the coastline for places like Sutton-on-Sea?
Yes, we are deprived. There's no doubt about it. It is difficult. We do have a large number of elderly people. We have young people deserting us and going off to other places. We've got to attract them back, and we've got to have a good infrastructure to do so. And we need a good leader at the helm. I think a lady would be rather good. If you want a hot tip, talking about using your metaphor of heat again, hot tip, I would say Penny Mordant would be the person to do it, because she has personality but also has brains and has a very good plan for conservatism, to my mind. And she knows about the coast, because she's down there on the south coast.
Janet, you know a lot about the coast as well because you've worked in business here over many different decades. What do businesses need right now from a Conservative leadership?
We must get our road network improved. To get to this coastline is, well, it's not impossible, but it makes it very difficult. It's not straightforward by any manner of means. There are so many hold-ups on the way going through the little villages. So we do need to be able to get the traffic here as quickly as possible so that they can spend their money. Other than that, it's a beautiful place here at Mablethorpe, Sutton-on-Sea. But we do need some more investment in the high street, especially at Mablethorpe. Hopefully we've got some, but it's not going to be enough, and we must spend it wisely. So I'm quite excited about all that. I'm pleased to say that I am just involved in it, and so I shall watch it very carefully. So it's what we need for the area, but we must be able to get to these resorts, and then not everybody comes by car, but I would think 80% of people come by car. So we must be able to park the car when they get here, not make it damn near impossible to park your car or strip them, their purses before they get out their car. Let's be a bit more generous. I would like to see some free car parking, actually, but I know I shall be shot down on that one. But, you've got to give a bit to get a bit back.
And would you like to see a Conservative leader or Prime Minister visiting places like Sutton-on-Sea and the coastline?
I certainly would. I'd welcome them with open arms and probably take them to lunch.
They'd have a brilliant day if they came out here. I think we're going to be sticking around, maybe go for a little bit of a walk on the beach, maybe talk to a few people about what they think they'd like to see from a new Conservative Prime Minister.
And your guests, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to hearing more from you later on. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon. How concerned is the education system about the work that needs to be done by this new leader in order to get the key work over the summer break completed? And who's doing the work right now? We'll have Robert Halfon on our programme next to discuss that. But first, let's take a break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 12:43 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. All this week's political goings-on in Downing Street have certainly taken their toll on the education sector. With 3 education secretaries in 3 days this week, what does it mean for students taking GCSEs, A-level exams this summer? Should parents be worried that the focus shift to a leadership race will impact on the education of our children? Well, my next guest is someone who clearly knows, and that's Robert Halfon, Conservative Member of Parliament for Harlow, and more importantly, with respect to him and the good people of Harlow, Chair of the Education Select Committee. Robert, welcome again. Good to see you. I did want to talk to you about how the business of government, not only in education, but perhaps more broadly, is being disrupted by these leadership elections. How worried are you about the key work that must be done over the summer break to get the schools up and running come the autumn?
Well, it's a huge concern. We've had 3 education secretaries in a week. In fact, in 3 days, it changed from Nadeem Zahawi to Michelle Donnellan to James Cleverly. I'm very worried about what is going on. I think that there is a serious problem with the catch-up programme. It's not reaching the most disadvantaged pupils, and there are big regional variations. So in the north, there's much lower take-up compared to the south of England. There's also a significant problem with the number of absent children. We've still got 124,000 so-called ghost children who've not returned to school. We've got 1.7 million persistently absent children. That's gone up by 100,000. What is the government going to do to get those kids back to school by September? The Children's Commissioner came to my committee and said she wanted them all back by September, but how are they going to make this happen? We've got exams coming up. Are disadvantaged pupils going to be unfairly affected because many of them weren't in school during lockdown? So there are some serious problems in the new Secretary of State's in-tray that he's got to grapple with.
Sure. There's also, I can't not ask you about it because it's been all over the papers and people talking about it. Amongst the junior ministerial team, let alone the Secretary of State, you've got one who is pictured, I think the Americans call it giving the finger to the crowd baying at her outside number 10 Downing Street, and another who's appeared on Twitter in some quite curious attire. I mean, you and I care passionately about this. Education has got to be taken seriously by the best people available.
Well, I hope that the minister who, the hand gestures, doing the hand gestures, I hope that she apologises. I think that's quite important. I don't know about the other case that you mentioned. This is a caretaker government. It will be in space for a few weeks, and I'm guessing whoever gets elected leader will maybe appoint a new education team. But I do worry. I think this is symbolic about how education is always the poorer relation compared to other areas of policy, particularly economics and the health department, the NHS. Everyone talks about protecting the NHS, and yet we don't talk about protecting our children's futures. And if you just go back to the draft terms of the COVID inquiry, it didn't even mention children until myself and many others lobbied very hard for it to be put in. And I think that we're in danger of carrying on the damage that we have done to over 2 years of school closures for most people by not looking after these children properly and making sure they get the best education they possibly can, despite the remarkable efforts of teachers and support staff.
Nadeem Zahawi says in his leadership manifesto that he would continue the reforms that he began when he was Education Secretary. Does that fill you with concern or with enthusiasm?
Well, I'd like to know what the reforms are that he was planning. There is the schools bill, but that has been gutted. Lots of the clauses taken out. I'd like to know what any of the leadership candidates are going to do to address deep social injustices in education. Last week, on Friday, our Education Select Committee published a big report on the poor outcomes of children in care in terms of their education. Of course, it didn't get much coverage because everything was focused on the leadership contest, but just 7% of these children get decent GCSE maths and English. Just 2% do apprenticeships. Just 39% of children aged 19 who leave care get into employment or training. Nothing is said about this. We know that 5% of children who are excluded only get maths and English GCSE. White working class boys and girls underperform compared to almost every other ethnic group. I'm talking about white working class boys and girls on free school meals. So what are the government going to do about that? So if any of the leadership candidates or Nadeem are talking about reforms to the education system, what I want to know is how are they going to deal with the COVID deficit? How are they going to get absent children back into school? How are they going to address deep social injustice? And how are they going to maintain standards and support the teaching profession? I also want to know if they have any new ideas. For example, there's been a lot of talk about replacing A-levels with a British baccalaureate. The Times Commission did a big report. It's something I've supported for many years. What are their views about that? In Arizona, the governor there in America has just changed the school system and is going to give the money directly to parents to choose the state school of their choice rather than as is currently done like here. Now, that may not be the right solution for the UK, but where is the radical debate about making our education system fit for purpose and fit for the 21st century?
Yeah. Robert, we have to leave it there. The only thing I would add, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, you're always extremely welcome, is the potentially very promising green paper on special education needs as well. Some of our most vulnerable children, as well as those white working class kids who are having a tough time of it. But that's a heck of an agenda for the candidates and indeed for the Department for Education. Robert Halfon, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, listening to that conversation was Anthony Millard, who's a former headmaster himself and is now chair of Anthony Millard Consulting, guiding, working with schools across the piece. I mean, that was jaw-dropping from Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee. More eyes off, more balls than I've heard from anybody in that position. How worried are you?
Very worried, Alistair, and I think Robert was spot on in most of what he said, but I think it goes further than that. I think we're looking for a much higher vision for education going forwards. Vision which isn't just about preparing people for the workplace. It isn't just about training. It really addresses the moral and cultural issues which I think most parents and indeed most students want from their education.
It's also intriguing that many people would say, oh, teachers have an easy time of it because we're now going into the summer holiday period. But I know because of family connections that actually that is one of the busiest periods. And it is for heads and school leaders who consult with you as they go through the post-COVID era, but they prepare for examination results and guiding those children. And add to that, one final thought is that teachers themselves are leaving the profession en masse and are threatening to strike over pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Teacher retention, teacher recruitment, these are critical issues, and teacher morale too. So whoever is going to take over as Secretary of State has got to bear those in mind. But also I think it comes down to the overall job, to the Prime Minister role as well. I think the public rightly look for leadership at the top, which is really bothered about education in society. It was something, whether you liked him or not, it was something Tony Blair got right with education. What I now see is the need for the whole political leadership, both at prime ministerial level, department level, to recognise the importance of teaching in society and also to look at innovation and, dare I say, Generation Z too. Most people I talk to still don't really understand the importance of Generation Z. It is, of course, children in the very young age group, maybe 8 years old to 14 years old, what their ideas are, what their expectations are. I went to a wonderful conference last week called Future Forward. It was all about Generation Z. It was mind-blowing.
Absolutely, and I saw some of the copy on that. My final question to you is this. It really does surprise me as a political observer that education doesn't seem to be up there with the key burning issues for so many people, because so many of us are lucky enough to have children. We all ourselves went to school of one sort or another. Is that partly because heads, teachers, leaders, call them what you will, I used to call them headmasters and headmistresses, are now much more empowered to get on and do the job? The kind of people who come to you for consultation, for advice and guidance, they are actually empowered. And ministers have kind of said, right, you guys get on with it. We're now running other things like the economy. Is there a downside to that?
No, I think you're right. I think they have more capacity than previous generations of heads have had. But also, I think they're looking for a higher level vision, which must come from the top. And it isn't there at the moment. Just two names from the past. Keith Joseph, again, like him or loathe him, he had a serious perspective on education. So did Lord Adonis from the Labour Party. And I think we're looking for somebody with that capacity to make their impact on educational thinking going forwards. Head teachers are immersed in the machinery of education, but they need to be enabled to look at the very high-level pastures.
Well, let's hope that some of the candidates, if not all of them, are listening to what you just said, Anthony Millard, and what Robert Halfon was saying immediately before we had our conversation. Great to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us, and hope that you will keep in touch with us and we can talk again. That's Anthony Millard there, former headmaster, and now chair of Anthony Millard Consulting. Now, away from all of the politics, are good causes, something we on the team all love to try and do. and I'm delighted to be talking to someone who's simply trying to do good. Steph Chilton's theme is gambling. She helped her husband, the world-famous England goalkeeper Peter Shilton, overcome his 45-year gambling addiction in 2019. Well, Steph's now ambassador and a counsellor with ARA, Recovery for All, and they've launched their new 6 to 10 project. And Steph Chilton joins me now live from Essex to tell me more about it. I'm so pleased to see you. I'm going to start, though, with... It's not a tough question because you're very open about it, and Peter was on social media this morning as well. This is deeply personal. What was it like living with and loving an addicted gambler?
Oh, it was heartbreaking, Alistair, really heartbreaking. You know, to have this this legend and this wonderful man that was suffering so badly. So, yeah, it was heart-rending, to be fair.
But you know from the experience you have as a counsellor and working with the charity that not all gamblers are as lucky as Peter was, i.e. having a partner who was prepared to say, OK, let's try and sort this out together. At the heart of this new campaign, you are saying you've got to be prepared to turn to friends and family, but friends and family have got to learn to embrace you, warts and all.
Most definitely. I mean, not everybody has a Steffi, do they, in that position? I was lucky because I had a heavy NHS background, Alistair, and that put me in good stead. But I had to learn it all myself. You know, I had no support at all, and I had to learn as I went along. And what I loved about this particular project is because I know how lonely it was for me, because often the focus is on the addict and seldom on the loved ones. So often we are the silent victims. You know, we're just as much a victim as what the addict is. So I recognised about 3 years ago that the language and the attitude and the stigma around gambling addiction had to change. And Peter obviously was really concerned about the suicide rates. That really shocked him, that's happening over gambling addiction. So that's when we went on our quest. And what I love about this project, Alistair, is there's nothing like it in the UK, because as a couple or as a family, when you've gone through gambling addiction, the road to recovery is a very long one. You know, there's emotional recovery and there's financial recovery that's needed. And what I loved about this project is that it addresses both.
We are putting up, for those who are listening to our conversation, Steph, on radio, because we have radio and television consumers, as it were, the branding, the 6 to 10 project and the rest of it. One thing I really want to underline for people who are kind enough to listen to this conversation is that when they think of gambling addicts, they often think of pretty lonely people stuck in a pretty dingy betting shop, playing with one of those fixed betting odd machines and having a quick cigarette or what have you. This is something that impacts right across the piece. Your husband is a world-famous, top-order sportsperson and lucky enough to earn very good money, and quite rightly too. It hits folk right across the spectrum.
Well, I liken it to heroin addicts. So, unfortunately, you know, the gambling addiction is the high and the buzz. And youngsters in particular can get drawn into it very quickly when they get that initial win. So they can have just one high and end up being a gambling addict. And when I watched Peter come through withdrawal, I realised then this is like heroin addiction. And I will always say that. So yes, you're quite right. And I hear from top professionals that are in prison. They've committed fraud as a result of this awful. It's a mental health illness, yep. and we all need to look at it as such. Yes, and it can affect anyone. I mean, many people, Alistair, you know, gamble and enjoy a bet, and we're certainly not anti-gambling, but all we're saying is we want to raise the awareness of the dangers of it and the harm of it.
And thank you for doing that, Steph Chilton, and good luck to you and all at the charity. It is such important work. And give our collective love to Peter as well. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador and Councillor for ARA Recovery for All, Steph Chilton. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme in our second hour. Tom Tugendhat will be with us to discuss his leadership campaign as 9 MPs have now thrown their hats into the ring. What can he offer? That's after this break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 1:30 You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. And thank you very much indeed for so doing. We're into our second hour of the programme and I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio right up until 2 o'clock. As I say, plenty more still to come, including our top discussion, the race to become the next leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. We'll be hearing more of what you think and we'll also be talking to Tom Tugendhat. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all the rest of the news so far today. Here's Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's 1:02. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. International Trade Minister Penny Mordant has become the latest MP to announce her Conservative leadership bid. 9 MPs are now in the running, with Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps putting their names forward yesterday. They were joined by former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid, who've both promised to cut corporation tax. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to declare her leadership intentions. This morning, Jeremy Hunt explained why he's throwing his hat into the ring.
Mr. Hunt, what made you join the race?
Because I want to do a great job for my country, that's why. And the sun is shining.
How are you going to unite the country?
Well, sort out our big economic and international problems.
While the MP for Tatton, Esther McVeigh, says she's backing Jeremy Hunt, who said she would be his deputy PM if he becomes Prime Minister.
I thought, no, let's reach out, let's reach across the Conservative Party, because you'll know Jeremy Hunt and I are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. But I do not believe that we can get the country back on board. And that's what's key here. It is reaching out to the country, delivering for the country. And this is what we've got to do so that we can appeal to the blue wall. And I don't believe anybody better than Jeremy Hunt can appeal to that blue wall. And he, of me, thought that I could be the person who reaches out to that red wall.
But the MP for Redditch, Rachel McLean, says Sajid Javid is the best man for the job.
He's been running the health service for the last year, dealing with the after effects of the global pandemic. So for me, he has got that combination. He's the total package for me. And I believe that he is also the person to unite our party, because let's face it, that's another challenge that we have. We have to appeal to all parts of the country and all parts of our United Kingdom. And I genuinely think he's the person to do that.
Almost 150 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel this weekend so far. Children were among those who were rescued from 3 small boats. It brings the total number of crossings this year to over 13,000, almost double last year's figure. Downing Street has confirmed the deportation agreement with Rwanda will continue despite Boris Johnson's resignation. Protesters in Sri Lanka say they'll continue to occupy both the Prime Minister's home and the presidential palace until they both officially quit. President Rajapaksa is expected to resign on Wednesday, and the Prime Minister has agreed to step down, but hasn't specified when. It follows dramatic scenes yesterday, which saw the PM's home set alight and protesters stormed the presidential palace. Thousands of anti-government demonstrators clash with police in the capital as the country endures its worst economic crisis in 7 decades. At least 10 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit a 5-story residential block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. At least 34 people are feared to be trapped under the rubble after the building collapsed. Rescuers are still trying to find survivors. The Royal Air Force has deployed fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. The RAF says it's part of an increased presence in the region and was requested by the host nations, who recently applied to join NATO. The UK signed mutual security assurance declarations with both countries in May. And all eyes will be on centre court today for the men's singles final at Wimbledon. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will be in the royal box to watch Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic battle it out for the title. Kate, who's the patron of the All England Lawn Tennis Club, is expected to present the trophies to both the runner-up and the winner during a ceremony after the match. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Alice, thanks very much indeed. With Penny Mordant launching her campaign for the Conservative Party leadership this morning, the candidates for the top job are mounting up. But who do you think should be leader, and what are the issues that matter to you? Do get in touch and we'll read out as many messages as we can toward the end of the show. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me again in the studio is Joanne Nadler, political commentator and author of the book Too Nice to Be a Tory. I asked you to give ear to what Robert Halfon said, which I found fascinating, and I hope folk at home did as well, because it touches not on the big issues so much as taxation and Brexit, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, but just good government and these candidates needing to be seen to be carrying on with their jobs in our interests while they contest who's going to be the new Prime Minister. Halfon's on the money, isn't he?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is, I think, one of the things that makes this particular leadership election so difficult for the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is in government. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, I've observed a lot of these things. And if you like, the model for a leadership election was the one that brought David Cameron to the leadership. But that was played out while the party was in opposition. So there was plenty of time to give airing to all of the views and to take a very sort of considered approach and for the various candidates to go around the country and do hustings. I think there's a sense now that that it's just not appropriate to have such an expansive campaign whilst the party's in government.
Conservative Home is talking about possibly 19 candidates at the end of the day, which, I mean, just...
Yeah, but I mean, OK, so there'll be people who'll be putting themselves, their names forward. But...
And as you rightly observed earlier, pitching for jobs, perhaps. They may not win, but if they have a reasonable showing, then they may be doing backroom deals.
Well, I mean, let's not be cynical. let's hope that they're standing because there's a particular issue or platform they want to raise. But, I mean, we'll see from the 1922 committee this week what the bar will be to justify their candidacy in the first place. And if it's, let's say, 20 MPs that you need as signatories, that's actually quite a high bar. That'll knock quite a few of these candidates out in the first instance.
How do you think, too nice to be a Tory, Joanne, the twin issues of Brexit and immigration will play out? Because as Kavanagh quite rightly pointed out, they are directly related, because Brexit was about stopping the free mobility of labour and taking back control of our borders. In some quarters, those are testy issues, but in most Tory quarters, there are issues that have to be taken on directly and dealt with. How do you think it'll play out?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, as I was saying in the first hour, the candidates need to be able to articulate compelling and practical answers to all of these questions. And in a way, I think getting off the starting blocks with talking about tax cuts, that's a kind of quite a binary discussion in some senses. And it's also a real, almost a pleasure, I think, for Conservative leadership candidates to talk about tax cuts. I think some of these other issues are more vexing because the party has, you know, made big promises and it hasn't really been able to deliver.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll be fascinated to see what the candidates say when they're asked, well, what would you do differently about border control? You know, what would you do differently about any number of these, you know, practical issues, which were sort of integral to the Brexit promise as well?
Lively moments in those TV debates when they start, undoubtedly. Joanne Nadler, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed for both midday and just now. Good to see you always. Thanks very much indeed. We like balance at GB News, and I particularly like it on this programme. And my next guest is Carolyn Harris MP, who is the Deputy Leader of the Welsh Labour Party, MP for Swansea East since 2015. And more importantly to me, a former parliamentary private secretary to the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. Great to see you, Carolyn. Is this contest not only going to define what makes a Conservative in 2022 tick, but define the politics over the next couple of years running up to the election?
I think it's going to have to, isn't it? I mean, I worry that we've got so many people coming forward. That just demonstrates to me the dysfunctionality of the Conservative Party at the moment. You know, normally you would coalesce around one sort of element of the politics. That's not happening. It could be what you've said earlier on about jobs, but you know, the Conservative Party needs a renewal, and I don't think being in government and actually completing successfully that renewal is a very good idea. I think the time has come for a general election and let the public decide.
OK, well, park that one about the timing of the general election just for a moment, if you will bear with me. But it strikes me as an impartial observer of these matters that they at least are having a genuine debate about those core issues. You know better than I do that within your own party, out in the country, there are still very many ordinary members of the party who mourn the loss of Jeremy Corbyn and everything that he stood for. And Keir's been there for 3 years trying to sort out what his Labour Party actually stands for. You owe us a debate as well, don't you?
Well, and that's been the problem, isn't it? When you mentioned the key problem here, Jeremy Corbyn. When Keir came in, he's spent the last 2.5 years actually trying to sort out the mess left over by Jeremy Corbyn and trying to put our party back into a good shape, hence a renewal. We're at the point now where we're moving forward and Keir Starmer is a Prime Minister in waiting.
Why do you think, as his former parliamentary private secretary, i.e. you were his ears and eyes in the parliamentary party and had private conversations with him, which I will completely respect, but why did you sense that he felt the need to clarify his stance on Brexit? Because nobody in this Tory leadership campaign is suggesting for one moment that Brexit will be undone. Why did Keir feel he needed to clarify that?
I think the public was still asking the questions, and if you're going into a general election, the public who predominantly voted for Brexit need to know that we're not the party that intends to take us back into Europe, which was the narrative that was being built around by some Conservatives who were preparing for a general election. So Keir needed to come out and say that. I mean, I didn't vote to leave the EU, but I do respect the referendum, and we've got to move on. It's a done deal. There's a lot of work to be done to make it a good deal or to make it workable, but we have to be the party that seems to be doing all we can to make sure that happens.
But if you end up in a coalition with the Liberal Democrats and or the Scottish National Party, you may have to go down that road whether you like it or not. And even the polls post the defenestration of Johnson suggest that you're not there yet to have an overall majority. You may have to go into coalition with pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit, pro-Europe people.
I mean, I don't want to talk about coalitions because I really don't think now's the time to be talking about coalitions. That's a conversation that would happen if we find ourselves in that position. We are going into the next election determined to win, and to win for the Labour Party, for the Labour Party to be the governing party, and to deliver on everything that we know is needed. Cost of living crisis, kids having food. That's the real issues here.
I completely accept that. David Cameron didn't want to talk about coalitions before it was forced upon him. But the fact of the matter is you are very astute as a reader of opinion polls, as indeed I try to be. And we have John Curtis on this programme regularly. We'll be talking to someone who knows the numbers very well in a moment. As things stand at the moment, if Sir Keir was successful, and it's his call, not mine or yours, to have a general election right now, you would not win an overall majority. So you've got to talk about coalitions, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well, I can't ever envisage the Labour Party going into a coalition like the Conservatives did with the Liberal. I would be more inclined to do something along the lines what the DUP did, which was supplying confidence. I certainly don't foresee situations where we have Lib Dem ministers on a Labour front bench.
Fascinating stuff. Carolyn, I don't think we've had this conversation before. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you very much indeed for fitting us into your schedule. I love a smile there at the end as well. Great to see you. Enjoy your Sunday afternoon, and I hope we can have a further conversation as well. That's Labour's Carolyn Harris, Labour Member of Parliament for Swansea East. Delighted to be joined now by Jamie Jenkins, political commentator and independent statistician. Jamie, good to join you. Can I pick up where I left off with Carolyn? I mean, they've got to talk about the possibility of a coalition at the moment, haven't they, whether they like it or not? I mean, you can't have the leader of the Labour Party saying we need a general election right now. Look at the polls. They wouldn't get an overall majority.
No, afternoon, Alistair. That's quite correct there, because if you just look at the facts and figures, obviously the SNP over the last 25 or so years since Tony Blair won that kind of landslide there, they've obviously strengthened their position in Scotland, and Labour have kind of gone backwards in Scotland. So if they're going to want to get that overall majority to try and govern in Parliament, they will have to do some backroom deals. And similarly with the crisis in the Tory party, Alistair, you look at Boris got that majority because of the Red Wall, and what's been happening in kind of the local elections and in some of the kind of the by-elections as well, as he's not only been losing support in that red wall, Alistair, he's losing support in the blue wall. And I think it's kind of what's been happening probably in some of these elections rather than kind of the integrity of Boris. This was probably left being pushed out, because a lot of these Tory MPs are looking now, we got 2 years away from a general election. If we carry on the way we're going, we're probably going to lose our seat. So I think you're right there. The Labour Party have got to be open about coalitions and what they would be doing. But again, what's the Tory party going to do? Because you could end up in a position like Theresa May did, where if they do have an election, manage to get, say, enough to kind of govern but not have an overall majority, they'll have to do some kind of deals themselves.
Do you sense, and it's early days and I completely accept that by focusing so sharply on tax spend, the size of the state, where you've got the rest of the field versus Rishi Sunak, basically, that those candidates have got it right? There's a poll in The Sun this morning that suggests Tory supporters, who will, after all, have the final say in this matter, they want to talk a lot more about immigration. Not many of them want to talk about Brexit.
No, I think, Alistair, there's three things that we've got to consider here. There's obviously, you've got to win the support of your fellow MPs, and that's where the pitching's going in, and you can see some MPs coming out supporting different candidates at the moment. So that's one of the first things you need to do. Depending then, if it does go to the Conservative members to put that vote in, then you obviously need to appeal to the wider membership. And we know that immigration is a big part of why the Labour Party kind of fell away in the north, with Boris saying, I'll get Brexit done, we'll have control of our borders. And a number of those Labour supporters that switched to the Tories have got a big kind of gripe with the way immigration's been run. But you've got to remember with these candidates, I think we've got 9 at the moment, and you're talking on the show that this could go up and up and up, that it's going to be, to say, we're 2 years away. The latest we can have a general election, Alistair, is January 2025. So we would normally have a summer election. So we could be less than 2 years away from a general election. And the next leader of the Conservative Party, who would become the Prime Minister, has to win that general election. So they need to appeal to kind of the broad brush. It's quite obvious they're talking about integrity and kind of taxes at the moment, because that's what's topical in the cost of living crisis. But there's some big things that's going to be on the plate of the next Prime Minister, Alistair. You've got energy security. You know, one of the reasons we've got this cost of living crisis is because of a lack of energy security. And successive governments have been parking. Theresa May tried to do this. It's probably what cost her kind of a majority in 2017. When you're looking at social care and the cost of all of that and trying to fund that in the long term, those are the issues that are going to be on the kind of the plate of the next Prime Minister. But they're not going to be issues I think we're going to be hearing much over the next couple of weeks, because those are the ones that they can't really explain how they're going to pay for it all.
Nadeem Zahawi's already raised the issue of identity politics, gender and the like. Penny Mordant felt the need just before publishing her campaign video to clarify via social media what she believes she said about gender identity. When I said that slightly surprised me as being a burning issue, Joanne Nadler, who you know, said, no, it doesn't surprise me at all. It is a burning issue amongst the core grassroots of the Conservative Party.
No, indeed, and across kind of the wider electorate themselves, because, you know, people have been calling out the Labour Party when they can't explain what a woman is. These are the things that kind of cut through, and a lot of people talk about them. They may have some fancy policies and what they're going to do to fix the cost of living crisis, but the media, you know, on social media, what people are talking in the pubs generally is, oh, did you see that MP couldn't explain what a woman is on the radio the other day? Those are the things that do cut through. And ultimately, what the public want really now is a competent government, Alistair. You know, we've had all of this COVID crisis the last couple of years. We're coming out the back end of that. I think where we are with the leadership at the moment, it seems to be Rishi Sunak. It's difficult for him to promise any tax cuts, obviously, because he was holding the books over the last couple of years. So you've kind of got Rishi Sunak saying, well, I need to look after the books. I can't cut taxes. But, you know, we've got the highest tax burden on the public now for 70 years. And the Conservative Party, Alistair, as you well know, is one that's generally been a low tax party, putting money back to the kind of the public. And I heard some of the other stations this morning challenging Jeremy Hunt, challenging Sajid Javid about if you cut taxes, that might push up inflation. Well, actually, if you look at the drivers' inflation of the country at the moment, about 2/3 of that is due to the energy costs, the transport costs, food costs, which is kind of global factors that's driving that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They could be cutting taxes immediately today and having an impact that's kind of at the pump.
Fascinating stuff. And I just remind folk at home, I know, and obviously you know because you were there, but you formerly worked at the Office of National Statistics as well. So on those number crunching points, you're as good at that as you are at the broad politics. Jamie Jenkins, always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. And keep in touch as this campaign develops and unfolds. Thank you very much indeed. Jamie Jenkins there, political commentator and independent, underlined, statistician. We've plenty more still to come in the final half hour, 40 minutes or so of Alastair Stewart and friends. After the break, we'll be travelling to the countryside for this week's Rural Spotlight to hear about landmark new farm proposals in Wales. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Afternoon, and the UK is looking dry with plenty of sunshine for many and feeling very warm with light winds. Let's take a look at the details. After a fine start across the southwest of England, it will remain dry with plenty of sunshine this afternoon, very warm with light winds and highs around 26 degrees Celsius. The fine and dry weather continues this afternoon across southeast England with lengthy periods of sunshine, feeling hot with highs of 29 degrees Celsius. A sunny day across much of Wales, though there will be some clouds around northern coasts. Very warm with highs of 27 degrees Celsius. It will be a fine afternoon with plenty of sunshine across northwest England, though there will be some cloud around the coast. Feeling warm with light winds and highs of 24 degrees Celsius. Across northeast England, the dry, fine and sunny weather is set to continue throughout this afternoon. Temperatures will rise higher than yesterday, so feeling very warm with highs of around 23 degrees Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland this afternoon, though, with some light rain for a time across Shetland and Orkney. There will be patchy cloud, but feeling warm with plenty of sunshine. Any lingering cloud across Northern Ireland will continue to break up throughout this afternoon, allowing for lengthy sunny periods. Remaining dry for all and feeling very warm with light winds. And fine weather is set to continue with plenty of sunshine this evening ahead of a warm night. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 25 minutes past 1 and you're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. Time now for our Rural Spotlight, where we highlight the issues that matter most to our rural communities and the rest of us who are so brilliantly served by our rural communities. Many things are already happening post-Brexit, though much remains to be done. One key area is agriculture. Now, in Wales, the government's launched a new sustainable farming scheme which aims to support Welsh farmers, sustain the environment and, crucially, produce more local food. But it's raised farmers' eyebrows too and divided opinion. So I'm delighted to be joined now to discuss all of that by NFU Cymru President Aled Jones. No mere administrator or lobbyist. He's an 8th-generation farmer who runs a pedigree herd of Holsteins with his wife and his family. Great to see you. This is post-common agricultural policy stuff. Upsides, downsides, in your view?
Yeah, well, I think let's remind ourselves, why we're in this position at the moment. The decision of 6 years ago to leave the European Union has set in motion that's all governments, because agriculture is devolved for all the nations. Each and every one of them has their responsibilities on consulting with the industry. We've had 2 consultations, 2016 and then 2018, which we've responded to, and the industry has been quite constructive in the response to it. And now we're seeing, as we approach the period when, the time frame that we have available is beginning to come to an end, Welsh governments really need to formalise their proposals, and that's why we've seen this announcement last week. So they are proposals, they're not set in stone as yet, but we have time now to work with Welsh Government to see if we can get to the position where the industry can agree a way forward. And this is crucial. It's absolutely crucial that we're getting this right.
One key thing that I heard very often from the farmers that I know in my neck of the woods, Hampshire and around there, is that there was a real fault with the Common Agricultural Policy generally, that it really only seemed to be talking to the big industrial scale farms, not family farms like yours. Has the Welsh Government's proposals grasped that key point?
Well, these are very sensitive issues for us in Wales. We're predominantly family farms, smaller in size to English farms, perhaps. So, that fabric of rural life is so crucial to us. And, we must remember the Welsh language is very strong in rural communities, and Welsh government want to make sure that is progressed as well. So these are things that we have to bring into the consultation and really deliver on these aspirations. Now, one thing that's crucial for us, had we stayed in the European Union, next January we would have been there for 50 years, and so all policies would have been formulated in the EU. Now it's our responsibility, and that's why it's so crucial that we get this right, and that this is absolutely key. We are facing a climate change crisis. We are seeing it, and these have huge implications on all of us. There's an energy crisis, as we've discussed earlier, and these are having ongoing effects on agriculture, just exactly the same as all people across the country. We need to protect the environment. This is crucial. We can't be irresponsible in the way that we manage our lands and the landscape and soils as well. Now, all these things are intertwined with food security. All of them together. And so central to this policy must be the sustainable supply of good, affordable food for all the people. And that's absolutely crucial. And everything that we do has to be tested around that principle. Do regulations and policies maintain or even enhance our capacity to produce food, sustainably produce food? I stress that, and that's crucial to us.
Let me split that into two crucial points, because I wanted to ask you about the environmental aspect of it again, because I hear two things from my farming friends who say, A, we know how to do that already. Thank you very much indeed. We're supporters of hedgerows. We plant trees. If we lose one in a storm, we replace it. What we don't need is a government that chops and changes between plant trees, grow grass and what have you. Leave the farmers who care more about the environment than anybody to get on and do it.
Yes, I think we do have the expertise. I don't say we have a monopoly of the wisdom, but there again, I think we are crucial because we have that ongoing attraction and affinity to working the land, so that's crucial. Now, if we can bring everybody together, that would be crucial in understanding of the stresses and strains that we do suffer, and we do have to address as well. If there's a joint working partnership with the industry as farming as well, I think we'd be more likely to be able to come to a position that we are totally agreed upon. We think we have to respect the fact that historically farming in Wales has had to be reliant on public support, and we need to maintain that public support because in some areas, which is quite marginal on land to farm, we need to keep these people there in those local communities, maintaining that rural vibrancy. And also reflecting, where the strengths lie in our industry in Wales. Grass growing is something that we do well. Yeah. Livestock as well, livestock and dairy is probably the predominant industries here in Wales for us here.
Aled, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. As you say, government has asked questions and hopefully is listening as well. Thanks for joining in the conversation with us here at GB News as well. NFU Cymru President Aled Jones. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Just slipped past 1:30, but we've plenty more still to come in that final half hour, including Conservative leadership candidate Tom Tugendhat joins me live on the programme. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news headlines. Here's Alice.
It's just gone 1:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. International Trade Minister Penny Mordant has become the latest MP to announce her Conservative leadership bid. 9 MPs are now in the running, with Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps putting their names forward yesterday. They were joined by former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid, who've both promised to cut corporation tax. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is also expected to declare her leadership intentions. Earlier, Jeremy Hunt explained why he's throwing his hat into the ring.
Mr. Hunt, what made you join the race?
Because I want to do a great job for my country, that's why. And the sun is shining.
How are you going to unite the country?
Sort out our big economic and international problems.
Well, the MP for Tatton, Esther McVeigh, says she's backing Jeremy Hunt, who said she would be his deputy PM if he becomes Prime Minister.
I thought, no, let's reach out, let's reach across the Conservative Party, because you'll know Jeremy Hunt and I are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. But I do not believe that we can get the country back on board. And that's what's key here. It is reaching out to the country, delivering for the country. And this is what we've got to do so that we can appeal to the blue wall. And I don't believe anybody better than Jeremy Hunt can appeal to that blue wall. And he, of me, thought that I could be the person who reaches out to that red wall.
Almost 150 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel this weekend so far. Children were among those who were rescued from 3 small boats. It brings the total number of crossings this year to over 13,000, almost double last year's figure. And the men's singles final gets underway at Wimbledon shortly. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have arrived to watch Nick Kyrgios and Novak Djokovic battle it out for the title. Kate, who's the patron of the All England Lawn Tennis Club, is expected to present the trophies. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It is 24 minutes to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. There's an increasing number of runners and riders now to seek to take over from Boris Johnson as Conservative Party leader and, of course, Prime Minister. Well, one of those people is my next guest. He's one of the declared candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party, Tom Tugendhat, Conservative Member of Parliament for Tunbridge and Mulling. And although he's never been a minister, he has proved a high-profile chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee at a crucial time. Good to see you. And really thank you very much indeed for coming in. Before we get on to, as it were, core beliefs and what defines you against the rest of the field, your campaign had a kind of soft launch back in January, I think it's fair to say. Was Boris Johnson's departure inevitable that long ago?
You know, I've been asked the question as to whether I'd consider the leadership of our great party and our great country for a long time, and I've always been completely honest about this. Because I think you should start a relationship honestly. You should be honest with the people we serve. And so I've always said, look, if the situation arises where I think there's an opportunity to make a difference to my country, I'll serve. And I did for 15 years in the army. I served in operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've served in the community I'm lucky to represent, Tunbridge and Mulling, as you know. And I hope I've served the community there well. They've been very kind about me in recent days, but I hope I've done I've done them proud. And what I'd like to do now is serve our country as Prime Minister. And I've always been open about it. I've never hidden it. I have never been in any way anything other than completely frank and open about it.
Do you also understand the sense amongst ordinary Conservatives out in the country, we get it a lot here at GB News, is that the parliamentary party and the government that he led did not serve Boris Johnson well? They do not like what you collectively did to him.
Look, I completely understand why people who voted for a leader are angry when the leadership changes. Of course I understand that. And I also understand that loyalty is essential in life. It's essential in the army, and it's essential in political life too. I have always been very clear where I stood. I have been very clear. I have made my challenges to those who've held the job of Foreign Secretary, or when in the liaison committee, the job of Prime Minister. I've always been completely open about it, because I don't believe in this underhand politics. What I believe in is speaking out clearly for our country, in defence of our community, in defence of our values, and making that count. Now, that's why, one of Boris's best friends, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, has already come out to support me, because although she led the Boris campaign, although she was inspirational and absolutely essential to Vote Leave, she recognises that, sadly, that time has moved on, and she's now looking for the future.
Sure. And you define that future in your manifesto, but also in the piece you wrote in The Telegraph a couple of days ago about a clean start.
That's right.
When I read that, I took that to mean a whole range of things, but one of them was not somebody who served in the Boris Johnson government.
Well, look, I think the whole country can see the state that government is in at the moment. I think the whole country can see that there's a real problem of trust in our community. There's a real problem of trust in government. And sadly, because there's some fantastic Conservatives out there, Conservatives in Parliament, Conservatives in councils, across the country. But sadly, there's a loss of trust in our party. And we need to get back. We need to return to service, because our party is at its best when it's delivering for the British people, when it's absolutely focused on the needs of the British people. Look, we've got into so many different stories. We've gone round the boy on so many different things. Fundamentally, look at the economy. Look at the fact that there's more month left than there is paycheck left for most of us. And we really feel it. I feel it. I'm sure you feel it too. £2 a litre, I notice it. I know exactly what it feels like. And so what we need to be doing is focusing on things that really matter to all of us.
I was talking to Trevor Kavanagh, a seasoned observer of all of these matters earlier on, and he said one of the challenges that you have is Brexit. It is to persuade folk out there that your conversion is credible. And you say in the manifesto and in the Telegraph piece, it will not be undone, it will be got done. Do you accept that is quite a persuasion job with Tory voters?
Do you know, it's funny you should say that, because people say that until they hear what I'm going to say. Because the reality is, I absolutely believe in the British people. I completely believe in Britain's possibilities and Britain's future. And I believe that Brexit can be a springboard. What we need it to be is a revolution. What we need it to be is a clean start for this economy, a clean start for our country, and to grasp the opportunities that, sadly, do you know what? We just haven't delivered on them recently. What we need to do is we need to be absolutely ruthlessly focused on making sure that Brexit works for everyone. Now, that means control of migration. We haven't got that right yet.
No.
We need the trade deals around the world. Anne-Marie Trevelyan's done an amazing job, but there's a lot more to do. And yes, it does mean sorting out any number of different issues that we need to smooth over, close off, get right. But, we can build new alliances, we can build new partnerships, and we're doing it already. I've already started the Viking parliaments, all the way from Ireland to the Baltic Sea, different ways of working together in Europe, partnering with NATO, looking at different gaps in the agreements that we can make work. I've already been, on many occasions, building the alliance with the United States, which, as you know, is extremely close to my heart. I was enormously proud to be decorated by the 82nd Airborne in Helmand a number of years ago. And, all these different alliances, this is how we're going to deliver for Britain. This is how we're going to make Brexit work.
How tough is Tom Dugunder on immigration? The Sun poll shows it this morning as being the top issue for Conservative voters.
Let me be absolutely clear. There is no way that human traffickers and those who effectively treat the most vulnerable in the world as slaves to their greed will be tolerated in any way at any time.
But is Rwanda the way to deal with it, where the people who are the subject of the Rwanda policy are the victims of those criminals, not the criminals?
So you're absolutely right. But the victim of the criminal needs to be protected, and sometimes you need to do that by showing very clearly that there is no reward, there is no profit in the crime. And that's what the Rwanda policy is important for. But let's not pretend...
Yeah, but you would stand by the Rwanda policy.
Let me be very clear. The Rwanda policy is essential, but it's not enough. And this, even Priti has said it herself, and, she's been very clear on this. Priti has said this would only stop a few hundred. Now, that's worth doing. But what we really need to be focused on is closing down the route. And you only do that if you get serious in North Africa, if you get serious in the Mediterranean. And that's why I've already been speaking to various leaders in Libya, and I've already been engaging with various different people in North Africa and in the Sahel, the Sahara Desert, to make sure that what we do is we close down those routes. Because if you think it's bad in the English Channel, and it is, by the way, it is much worse in the Mediterranean, where hundreds are dying every year, and it's absolutely criminal what's happening in the Sahara. Quite literally, there are smuggling routes of people where there are thousands left to die in the desert. This is human trafficking. It's a modern form of slavery. It's wrong, and it must stop. We must protect people against this evil.
Are you a tax cutter from the core and heart of your beliefs, a la Thatcherite belief, or are you a tax cutter now because you grasp and recognise the cost of living crisis?
So a few months ago, we had a vote on whether or not national insurance contributions should rise. I didn't vote for it. I didn't vote for it not because I have any moral problem with taxes as an idea. Of course we have to pay taxes. Of course we need to pay for the things that we share in common. I had a problem with it because it's a tax on workers at a time when we need the economy to grow. Now, this is a point that Ronald Reagan made so brilliantly, and you say I'm a Thatcherite. That's true, I am, but I'm more of a Reaganite.
I asked if you were a Thatcherite.
OK, well, you could have said I am a Thatcherite, but I'm more of a Reaganite. And I tell you why I'm such a fan of Ronald Reagan, because I don't know if you've heard his 1964 speech, Tax for Change. It's an amazing...
Trickle-down economics.
It's exactly right.
Profound.
It is absolutely profound. He makes the point, and I'm going to slightly misquote him, so I hope you'll forgive me, but he makes the point that no government has been able to deliver for the people when it starts to tax over about a third. He says, I think it's 37, 38%. And the reality here is this isn't just about tax. It's not just about paying for services. It's fundamentally about liberty. How free are you, Alistair? How free are you if you can't decide how your money that you've worked hard for is spent? How free are you if your economic liberty is constrained? How truly free are you if your decisions are changed or constrained by the whims of a Whitehall official or a Treasury minister? How free are you?
Final point on that, and then my final question will follow it sharpish, is what you've just said about tax and how you voted, with the noble exception of Liz Truss. I hope you don't mind my saying that publicly, because she argued with Jacob Rees-Mogg in Cabinet against those national insurance rises as well. All of your other contestants are not being completely consistent in saying they've suddenly all become tax cutters.
Well, look, I am absolutely delighted that I'm already leading the Conservative Party in the direction that it should have gone. And I think that's so important, because actually leadership isn't just about standing up to your enemies. And we've spoken about this. I've stood up to China, I've been sanctioned by them, I've stood up to Russia, I've been abused by them in many different ways. It's not just about standing up to your enemies. Sometimes it's about standing up to your friends. And that's what we've got to do.
OK, my final question is this. If you were to win...
When I win.
Very Tom Tugend about that. You're going to have to be able to lead a government, form a government, tell people to do things that you want them to do. You're going to have to eyeball senior civil servants, men and women who have been in the game much longer than you. I know you've been in the army. I know you've chaired the Select Committee extremely successfully. The simple, strongest charge against you is you don't have a souvenir red box on your mantelpiece. You have no ministerial experience, and you want to be Prime Minister of this country.
You're telling me I don't have a souvenir red box. You're absolutely right. What I do have is I've got souvenirs from Iraq and Afghanistan. I've got a dodgy shoulder and a dodgy knees from soldiering in some of the hardest parts of the world. I've got photographs, sadly, of some people who aren't with us anymore, alongside whom I served and built a government in Helmand, built the National Security Council of Afghanistan. I've got souvenirs, memories and experiences of the real world, of what it really takes to change a country, what it really takes to build a society, and fundamentally what it really takes to get over the division. We need a clean start to get beyond the division, beyond the playing of politics. I'm not interested in the playing of politics. What I'm interested in is delivering for the British people. And if we're going to get there, you know this, Alistair, better than anyone, We need a clean start. We need to return to service because we need a government that serves the British people, a Conservative Party that so much already does, but a Conservative Party in Westminster that actually serves the British people around the country. We need the Union to come together properly as one Great Britain, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom. And then we need a new deal for Britain to make it all work. Now, we can deliver it. And the way we do it is we have a 10-year economic plan so that we balance north, south, east, west, rich, poor. We balance all the needs in the country over a long period of time because you can't do it in a day.
Sure. And with lower taxation, lower spending, and ultimately a smaller state at the heart of it.
That's exactly right. But you can only do it if you have a 10-year economic plan. You can only do it with a clean break. You can only do it if you have a plan for growth. And only then do you get an economy that delivers a stronger country, a more resilient country. I know how interested you are in food resilience. You're absolutely right. And most importantly, a fairer country.
Tom Tugendhat, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I can't say good luck because I would be talking to all of the candidates, I hope, but very, very good to see Tom. And the last word in the programme today goes to another good friend of this programme, Sean Worth, who's a former Downing Street advisor and political commentator. And there he is. We asked him to listen very carefully to what Tom Tugendhat said. Tom is still sitting there, therefore we'll hear this. First of all, how well did Tom do on explaining that whilst he didn't have a souvenir red box, the experience issue, he had a range of other very real experiences that he felt did qualify him to be a serious candidate for the prime ministerial job of this country?
Well, there's some big beasts coming out today, Alistair, that are competing with him. But in terms of his performance, I hope he won't mind me saying, I thought he was a bit nervous at the start, but who wouldn't be with the great Alastair Stewart giving you a grilling? But the more you talk, less about the intellectual foreign affairs stuff and more about sort of cost of living and day-to-day, and also your army experience, that's what trumps the political careerism that most of the candidates will be coming to you with. I think he's got a good chance. I certainly expect him to be in the last four, with possibly Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss or Penny Mordant, Tom. I think he's got a good chance, really do.
One of the things that I also picked up, listening very closely to what he had to say, was his public reminder that he voted in Parliament against those increases in national insurance, whereas all of the candidates, with the exception of Liz Truss, who supported it as a government, Liz argued against it in Cabinet. He's got a clean pair of hands on what people are making the issue: tax, spending and the size of the state.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of candidates saying that they'll cut tax, but I don't think they've got any real idea about what the impact will be and what the economics will be of that. And frankly, they probably don't care because all they're trying to do is get through to the Conservative Party membership and say, I will cut taxes. Whether you can afford it or not is a different question. And my view is personally that somebody should be saying something about which taxes and how they will, if you cut them, they'll produce more revenue to the Treasury. And personally, I think that's business rates. But let's see what they say. And they're going to get really grilled on this by people like yourself. What is the economic impact? How can you afford it? Who's going to pay for it? All of that. So I'm really looking forward to the kind of what they're coming forward with on policy. But you're right. I think at present, really, the field is wide open. Everyone wants to chuck in what's called red meat policies. I will deal with immigration. I will lower tax. I'll cut regulation. Let's see some scrutiny and let's see who comes through that.
Well, we began the programme at 12 o'clock, a job you've done for us many times, which I'm delighted to say, with Paul Johnson's tweet this morning from the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying exactly that. There is no point in saying I'm a tax cutter unless you explain how the books remain balanced. Back to Tom. Was he persuasive to your ears on Brexit and immigration?
Well, the big issue for him, for the membership, I think he'll get, I expect him to get down to last four or something like that. I would think he would. But remember, he's not the favourite, but then neither was David Cameron or Margaret Thatcher. So got a great chance. The big thing against him, obviously, is if he voted Remain. And while sensible, people that are well versed in politics can see that he, amongst a number of others, probably voted Remain out of loyalty to the Prime Minister as much as fear of the unknown and all of that. And it was a perfectly rational decision to make. The membership really don't like that. So that's the big hill he has to climb. And, your piece earlier showed that he's brought some Brexiteers in with him, that in order probably to show that he's got a team of people that believe in Brexit. He needs to be a bit more convincing on that. I mean, I think that people that didn't vote Brexit in this leadership election will essentially have to drift more right-wing in order to get over the membership. So that's a really interesting dynamic, and you're right to raise that.
Yeah. And my final point is exactly that, and it applies to all of the candidates. I was banging on yesterday about the fact that, in my mind, it's a reset moment for the Conservative Party, with tax spend, size of the state at the top of the agenda, and all of them have got to be persuasive on that mantra. I found his final answer about a 10-year plan, and that it isn't just tax cuts for the cost of living crisis. It is to return to that trickle-down economics of Ronald Reagan and that own your own money agenda of Margaret Thatcher. If he can persuade folk of that, he is in with a fighting chance.
I think he is. The challenge, again, is people like yourself grilling him on how we're going to afford that when we've just literally splashed out billions keeping business afloat with furlough and business support. So what we want to see is somebody that has a serious economic plan, that wants to deliver tax cuts, but can make the case for them in terms of, here are tax cuts I can make that will increase revenue to the Treasury, not get your children into more and more and more debt. Because another big issue that the candidates will have to deal with is a lot of the people voting in this leadership election have children that aren't on the property ladder, that are coming out of university with huge amounts of debt. We don't want to be a country that has splashed billions and billions of pounds on supporting business through the crisis of COVID, and previous to that with Labour governments just literally splashing money on pretty much everything, and all of that debt being landed on our children. Yeah. What is your economic... I want to see some economists and some serious policy coming out of this, and I think a lot of people will feel the same.
Well, we'll watch it with great interest. Sean, it is genuinely always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much for shedding your informed and very well-connected light upon that final conversation. You stay in touch. Welcome back anytime. Thank you very much indeed. Sean Worth, former Downing Street advisor and political commentator. Well, I asked you at the beginning to be in touch, and goodness me, you have. I'm going to go quite quickly now, if I may, because I don't want to get in trouble like I did yesterday for running out of time. Let's start with Simon. For the last 40 years, every MP and every party has avoided the tough decisions about tax. That's why health and social care and children's services, remember what Robert Halfon was saying earlier on the programme, are in such a mess, and our economy is struggling. Tim comes in, I want the tax burden to be shared more fairly, and I'm happy to pay more if necessary to properly fund education, the NHS and climate change migration. I would also prefer it if the government didn't corruptly waste money on their mates and their supporters. Elaine, the person who'll get my vote is not the person who promises tax cuts, welcome as they may well be, but are condescending to the electorate. Cancel VAT on energy bills, but beyond that, leave it well alone. Elaine, Tim, Simon, all the rest of you, thank you very much indeed. Do keep those views coming in, but that, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for today and indeed for this weekend. But I'll be back on your screens tomorrow afternoon as I'm sitting in for my buddy Liam Halligan on The Money. And then I'll be back here next weekend. Until then, have a great time. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Afternoon, and the UK is looking dry with plenty of sunshine for many and feeling very warm with light winds. Let's take a look at the details. After a fine start across the southwest of England, it will remain dry with plenty of sunshine this afternoon, very warm with light winds and highs around 26 degrees Celsius. The fine and dry weather continues this afternoon across southeast England with lengthy periods of sunshine, feeling hot with highs of 29 degrees Celsius. A sunny day across much of Wales, though there will be some clouds around northern coasts. Very warm with highs of 27 degrees Celsius. It will be a fine afternoon with plenty of sunshine across northwest England, though there will be some cloud around the coast. Feeling warm with light winds and highs of 24 degrees Celsius. Across northeast England, the dry, fine and sunny weather is set to continue throughout this afternoon. Temperatures will rise higher than yesterday, so feeling very warm with highs of around 23 degrees Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland this afternoon, though, with some light rain for a time across Shetland and Orkney. There will be patchy cloud, but feeling warm with plenty of sunshine. Any lingering cloud across Northern Ireland will continue to break up throughout this afternoon, allowing for lengthy sunny periods. Remaining dry for all and feeling very warm with light winds. And fine weather is set to continue with plenty of sunshine this evening ahead of a warm night. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuit